Jeff, you get back there? All right. Kristen, ready to go? All right. All right, everyone, we'll go ahead and get started. We'd like to welcome Patrick Cantlay to the interview room here at the 2022 Players Championship. Patrick, fifth career start here at TPC Sawgrass. Just talk about your thoughts on the golf course and the challenge it's represented for you, and kind of how you've maybe learned more and more about this golf course each time you've come back.
Sure. Yeah, I think the golf course has changed a lot since the tournaments moved back to March. And this is, if they don't cut the rough, the longest the rough's been since I've been coming here. Golf course is good, and should be in really good shape this year. Hopefully the rain will stay away and we'll get a really good test.
And making your first start since the Genesis Invitational, you had a couple of good finishes on the West Coast there. Just talk about how your game has been trending ahead of the tournament here this week. Yeah,
game's been good this year. I feel like I've been doing a lot of really good things, and so I'm just going to keep sticking to the process and continue to do the things that have been working.
All right. With that, we'll go ahead and open up for questions. If you have a question, raise your hand. Start over here with Gary.
Patrick, you had a couple of decent tournaments in your first two starts when it was in May. Has there been a little bit of an adjustment period for you personally playing this course in March?
I would have liked to seen what I would have shot the COVID year. I think I was 6 or 7 under the first day.
That's right.
So, that's just lost to the ether. Yeah, I mean, the golf course is definitely different this way. I think there's, granted, the roughs up this week has been less of a premium on hitting fairways because the golf course has been softer and more of a point and shoot test than it is a strategic test, it moving back to March.
And do you feel like that your game matches up to this course?
I do, yeah. I like the golf course. I think it's very good, and it definitely requires you to have full control of your nerves, especially coming down the stretch.
Okay. Over here. Doug?
Two things completely different. How would you describe this course in one word, if you could?
Precise.
Okay. Way off topic. When people or some players would say that the tour needs to be more transparent, do you agree with that? And if you do, what exactly does that mean in your eyes?
Well, I would say almost any time you really get into trouble, I would say it's when things aren't transparent, when people don't know where everything is. I would say one of the tough things about the way it's set up out here is the onus tends to be on the player to go and figure those things out for himself. There's not like a big debrief, or there's no one that is a professional that's really looking into it. So it seems as though if a player's interested, he can try and go down that rabbit hole and figure it out, but he's kind of on his own. And so I think that is maybe the biggest challenge in that regard, is trying to get everyone to agree on things when everyone kind of has to go their own way to try and figure it out.
Is it hard? I'm sorry. Do you think it's hard to get a consensus out here?
Yeah, I think it's hard to get a consensus with 150 people from in any area. I'd say it's hard to even get people to sit down and agree on certain factors or certain facts. And I think we see that more and more in the world, even if you go into like politics being so polarized lately, is you can't even get people to agree on the same set of facts to begin with. So having a productive conversation becomes increasingly difficult.
Okay. All right, Patrick, we're just going to right over here to Steve.
Patrick, Tiger goes in the Hall of Fame tomorrow night. How old were you when you first became aware of him, and how has he influenced you and impacted the golf since then?
I couldn't tell you exactly when I could think of like knowing who Tiger was. I had to be very young, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. First time I remember watching him on TV was the 2000 British. I was probably 8. And his impact on the game is probably the most profound of anybody ever. I mean, especially the pro game. I wouldn't say I know enough about Palmer or Bobby Jones to say, or Nicklaus to say how they impacted that at the time. But I mean, I think every pro out here owes a debt of gratitude to Tiger, because the sport wouldn't be where it is today without his impact.
Yeah. I'm just going to go back over here to Mark. Hey, Patrick. A little spinning off of what Doug was talking about in the transparency element. Every other sport, when a player is suspended, it announces that, and the tour doesn't. And Jay Monahan addressed it today, that said that the players have spoken to him about, the PAC group has spoken to him about that. What's your stance on that? Is that part of the transparency that you referred to that you'd like to see change?
Yeah, it could be. I'd say I mean, yeah, I think there's pros and cons of both. I mean, it would so depend on, because I would say some people have been suspended and they do list a reason. So it's almost like I don't even know what I don't know to know if there's a situation where they held something back and they shouldn't have, or they didn't hold it back and they should have held it back. So that's a tricky scenario, because I could potentially draw up a situation where it would be beneficial or the right thing to do to hold some information back. But like I said, I don't know what I don't know. So if there's a situation where it may be, I would have thought that they should have announced it and they didn't, I wouldn't even be in a position to know that sitting here today. So it's a tricky one.
Right now, would you know it unless you had spoken to him, or do the fellow players even know if a guy's not around? And
Well,
I mean, obviously Phil is somebody we're talking about, because that's kind of a lot of speculation right now about.
Oh, like
that.
asking if he actually is
Yeah,
suspended right now, or he's just taking some time off.
Yeah, would you guys even know unless you'd spoken to him?
I wouldn't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's something that I wouldn't even feel comfortable commenting on, because I don't even know anything about it.
Yeah, no, I wasn't asking you specifically about it. I was just using that as an example. Just
Right.
as a quick follow on that, and it was something we spoke to Jay about. Do you feel like the players feel like they have ownership in the tour? Because there seems to be Jay seems to feel very much so that the players do feel that way, and I think there's a lot of players that maybe don't feel that way. I'm kind of curious where you stand on that.
Well, even using that term ownership, no one owns the tour. The tour is a 501c6, so no one owns any part of it. So I would have to say no in that question. I mean, no one owns the tour, so I don't think anybody could feel like they have ownership of the tour.
All right, we're just going to go right over here, Alex.
Just to follow up on that, do you feel like you're a shareholder?
I'd probably have to look at the definition of shareholder, but not in the sense that I think of it. Like if I buy a share of Coke, then I own a small percentage of Coke. There's no way to do that on tour.
Can you profit share?
Yes, that's different than being a shareholder. Yes.
Okay. My other question was going to be in regards to injuries. Since gambling is becoming a larger and larger part of this sport, it seems like players should have to disclose an injury like they do in any other sport, so that people that gamble can actually know what's going on. Are you in favor of that or not?
One of the things I like looking at after a hockey season is the playoff injury report, and I know those guys don't disclose, so it's not every sport that's doing it all the time. Not to mention that I could foresee an instance where, how do you report something that's a minor injury? Do you want everyone to know? I mean, I don't know, where do you draw the line on disclosing? So that seems like a really a tough thing to implement, a wide sweeping rule to implement. Whenever you have an injury, you need to report it for the sake of gambling.
Would you feel at a disadvantage if you had to disclose it?
I'm not sure. I mean, it depends on who you are. I imagine if you were particularly high profile, you may not want to answer questions about it all week or for a couple weeks or months or 6 months. Hey, I know you reported a minor wrist injury 6 months ago. How's that feeling? So I could see a scenario where, you wouldn't want to disclose that.
Perfect. Go Rex and then.
You talk about learning how to ask the right questions as far as it goes to the tour. Since you've been on the PAC this year, have you learned anything in those meetings that either surprised you or sort of opened your eyes that maybe you didn't know before?
I've only had one meeting, so I wouldn't say I've had enough of a experience yet to really be able to answer that in full. I do know more about the structure of how tournaments are ran and all the entities involved for running a tournament, so I know the business model better than I did before, and I think that's good for me and any tour player to know more and more about how the tour business model works.
Patrick, over the years, the game has evolved into more of a technical experience rather than a game of feel. What I mean by that is that with the advent of the green books and the drivers looking like something from outer space and the ball going so far, do you feel that all this technical things that have been added has taken away from the romance and the feel for the game, and how would you address that?
Well, the greens books are gone, so that's less of a factor. I'd say feel is still paramount in this game. I feel like different players maybe put an emphasis on it more or less, but whenever I've talked to Tiger, he always talks about how he feels it in his hands and he feels it in the club, and he's trying to feel the weight of shots. I've picked Fred Couples' brain a lot. He has a tendency to always hit it pin high, even if it's 20 miles an hour blowing any which way. He'll take sometimes 2 clubs less than what I think, and he might only hit a 4-iron 170 yards, but he tends to always be pin high, and he talks about just feeling it, feeling the wind, feeling and imagining what kind of flight he wants to hit with the 4-iron, and imagining how the ball is going to land. And so I still think feel is a huge part of the game. But to your point, I do think it's possible for people to take feel out of the game, especially with the TrackMan and Foresight machines. There's definitely a more quantifiable nature to what's going on out here now more than ever.
All right, we're just going to stay down here on the right.
Patrick, when the tour shifts from the West Coast to Florida, and the golf courses are just by the scores obviously are much harder, how do you guys treat that, and does that have anything to do with taking the 2 weeks off, kind of resetting to get ready for these more difficult golf courses?
After seeing the last 2 weeks, setup seems to be the biggest determining factor as far as scores. I don't even know if it's necessarily the golf courses, but that was just, I played 3 weeks in the California swing, or the West Coast swing, to end it, and so I just needed a couple weeks off before we kind of start the major championship season, and obviously kicking off here with a big event. It didn't have much to do with the golf courses being harder or easier.
All right, Patrick, we appreciate the time and wish you all the best this week.
All right, thank you.